Hello and welcome to Want to Hear Something Weird, a weekly weird podcast about weird stuff with normal hosts. I'm one of them. My name's Tom.
Wow, I'm Laura.
Laura, what have you got for me this week?
Tom, I want you to hold on to your britches because this is a scary one.
Okay.
This is the story of the Bell Witch.
Oh, I've heard. I know of this witch, but I know of this witch by name only.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Which is, not something I can say about many witches, or maybe something I can say exclusively about witches, that I know some of them by name, but not by reputation.
The Bell Witch, I also just knew by name, so I thought, let me hear the story. Why is the Bell Witch so well known? Maybe the most well known witch?
Is it because of the
At least
Blair
in
Witch?
American lore. Well, the Blair Witch was
partially
inspired by this witch.
Oh, okay.
But this witch, I think, inspired a lot of sort of witches,
All right.
witch stories. So we're in 1817.
Okay.
And 67-year-old John Bell is walking through his cornfield and he comes across what he thinks is a dog, except the head is really small and it has ears that stick straight up like a rabbit. Long ears that stick straight up like a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
So his instinct is to shoot at it.
Right. It's a weird looking dog. Let me shoot at it.
And it disappears and he just kind of continues about his day.
Yeah.
Doesn't think too much about it. John Bell is the patriarch of a family of 9 children.
Okay.
He and his wife Lucy live in a 2-story cabin home in Red River, Tennessee, which is present day Adams, Tennessee.
Okay.
They have enslaved people working on their property. So,
Ooh.
yeah. So you can get the impression they're pretty well off, but there's a lot of people in this house. There's a lot happening. So later that night, where they're sitting down for dinner and they hear knocking or beating on the walls outside of the house.
Okay.
A few of the sons run outside to try to see what's going on, but there was nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
The sounds continue every night with increased frequency and force.
Okay. So they're getting louder more often.
And over the following weeks, the Bell children start waking up in terror, claiming that rats, or the sound of what sounds like rats, are chewing on their bedposts.
Okay. I thought you said drats.
Drats.
But yeah, I thought this was going to be like the origin story of where drats comes from.
Unfortunately, I don't know that origin
Okay.
story.
So they're hearing rats chewing on their bedposts.
Yes.
All right. Not great.
So soon afterward, the kids are then reporting that their bed covers are being pulled off in the night and their pillows are being thrown on the floor by an apparent invisible force. So something's messing with them.
Something supernatural is,
Over time, the Bell family begin to hear faint whispering noises that are too weak to understand what they're saying.
Right, but they can tell that that sounds like a whisper, that sounds like a voice. But they can't quite make out what it's saying.
Right. But eventually, it slowly becomes a little bit more loud that they think it sounds like an elderly woman.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, the incidents in general are becoming a lot more intense. The youngest daughter, Betsy, she's the only child's name that you're going to have to remember in this story.
Child Betsy. Kid Betsy.
She began to sort of have these very violent encounters with this force.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So it would pull her hair and slap her repeatedly.
Yeah.
Which would leave welts and handprints on her body and her face. Eventually, these sort of attacks, you could call them, became so severe that John, the father, who initially swore his family to secrecy, you can't tell anyone about this. These are crazy. This is a very upstanding family in the community. They're very involved in their church, in the village.
Every family, every community has an upstanding family and a ghost family, but not
We don't want
not
to be,
both.
We don't want to be the ghost family. But eventually he confides in his closest friend and his neighbors, the Johnsons. So John wants the Johnsons to spend the night at the house in order to prove to himself that he and his family aren't crazy and making up these things in their mind,
Right.
that it's actually really happening. So as you can imagine, at first the Johnsons Mr. and Mrs. Johnson are extremely skeptical. And
how would you react if like friends of ours said, "Hey, we'd like you to come stay the night at our house because we think either our house is haunted or we're crazy and we'd like you to weigh in."
we think a ghost is beating up our child every night.
Right. We'd either like you to see that or not see it and then start thinking we've lost our minds.
Yeah, I wouldn't be there to do it.
Depend on the house.
Depend on the house?
Yeah, if it was like a nice house.
Oh.
They had like a foosball or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, then I could be convinced. If it's just like some old crappy house that they're like in their ghosts, be like, well, no, then that's 2 reasons why I don't want to stay over.
But eventually Mr. and Mrs. Johnson do agree to spend the night at the home of the Bells. So that evening it started quietly, nothing really going on. But once they went to bed,
yeah, that's when the ghosts come out.
The neighbor couple experienced the same terrifying events that plagued the Bells, and especially their bed covers were pulled off and Mr. Johnson was slapped.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so now they're slapping adults.
Yeah. He leapt out of bed allegedly and said something in the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want? And there was no response. And the next morning, Mr. Johnston, told the Bells that he believed that whatever this disturbance was from an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about. As time passed, the entity's voice grew stronger and more distinct. It sang hymns, it quoted scripture, engaged in intelligent conversations, and even recited 2 sermons that, word for word, 2 sermons that 2 different pastors gave simultaneously, except they were 30 minutes apart. So there was just like no way a single human being could have heard both of them.
Then
so somehow
how did they know that?
Well, they got together and...
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, somehow this ghost it had the power to attend both of the sermons. So news of this is going on for several years.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's getting more and more powerful all the time.
Yeah. So news of these occurrences and what's going on down at the Bell farm are quickly spreading far and wide. And people would travel quite a distance to come and spend the night at the house and experience the witch.
See if they can get slapped too.
Yeah. And apparently, several hundred people have claimed to have experienced the ghost or the witch or whatever you want to call it.
That's how they sold all those "I got slapped by the Bell Witch" t-shirts.
I went to the Bell property and all I got was slapped.
Slapped by a ghost.
And the story eventually reached Nashville, where an eventual U.S. president, Andrew Jackson, was living, and he took an interest in the so-called
getting
Bell
slapped
Witch.
by a ghost.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to check it out, and allegedly, a few of the sons of the Bell family had fought under General Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. So he knew them, allegedly. And so as soon as Jackson and his entourage pull up to the house, their carriage gets stuck in the mud.
Okay. Probably not like the craziest occurrence, but still,
if you're thinking,
off to a bad start.
If you're thinking there's a witch here doing bad things, you're going to blame any little inconvenience on her, I think.
Yeah.
But so naturally, that's what Jackson did. He said it must have been the witch. And a disembodied voice said, "All right, General, we'll let the wagon move on. I will see you tonight."
Yikes. All right.
So later at the farm, one of Andrew Jackson's men, who claimed to be a witch tamer.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone kind of laughed him off at that. But he claimed that he had a silver bullet that could kill any spirit.
Oh.
So
usually those are reserved for werewolves.
Yeah.
That you need a silver bullet.
Hey.
Or like a regular person. If you shoot them with a silver bullet, it might kill them also.
Well, I wonder what came first, this story or werewolves?
I mean, there have been werewolf tales for a long time.
Okay. With a silver.
But yeah, I don't know when the idea of a silver bullet being what could kill them came about.
But so they're hanging out at the Bell home and nothing's really happening. And this guy claims, well, yeah, it's because I have this silver bullet and the witch is afraid of it. As soon as he says this, he starts to jump around and scream, saying that he was being pricked and beaten up by an invisible force. And a voice says to everyone else in the group, particularly Andrew Jackson, that another fraud would be revealed the following day. And after this happens, all the guys are freaked out and they want to leave. But Andrew Jackson's like, well, no, I want to stay and find out who this other fraud is. Who's with me? Who's the fraud with me? So he wants to stay. Apparently, all the guys sleep in tents out in the property. And it's unknown what happened that night.
Okay.
But villagers saw Andrew Jackson and his entourage speeding out of town the following morning, saying something like, I would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch.
So whatever happened, they skedaddled out of there quick in the morning.
Run out of town.
Run out of town by the Bell Witch. Slapped and pinched and poked by the Bell Witch.
So who was the Bell Witch?
Who was the Bell Witch? That's what everybody wants to know. From Andrew Jackson to me, everybody's asking who was the Bell Witch.
Eventually, this voice is obviously saying full words and sentences. People
full
are
sermons.
fully full sermons. People are understanding everything she's saying. And she, at one point, claims that, people had been buried on this land. She claims to be an indigenous woman.
Okay. The Bell Witch.
The Bell Witch.
Okay.
And that her body was buried on the land and that she was back just looking for a tooth.
No. Okay.
The story apparently to John Bell checks out because one of his sons a few years earlier had found human remains or human teeth, I think specifically in the property. And so he thinks, well, this checks out. Maybe that's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah. We just got to put those teeth back where we found them.
But then she says, just kidding. That was all a prank.
Oh.
Like she's messing with them a lot.
Right.
Now.
It's just a prank, bro. Relax.
So the witch began eventually responding to the name Kate.
Okay.
And claimed to be, which everyone connected the dots, was the witch of Kate Batts. Now, who is Kate Batts?
Who's Kate Batts?
Kate Batts is a woman.
Batts is a good last name for a witch.
Batts.
That's close enough.
Kate Batts was a woman who lived in the village and was described as, quote, a big woman, strident and coarse, which illegal for a woman to be.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like how you describe like a horse.
Yeah. She was also unmarried, so really just wham bam.
Yeah.
Cast out by society. She's definitely seen as an outcast and,
she's too coarse.
She's probably a witch because she doesn't fit in with the society standards.
Right.
Apparently at one point also there's a lore about her that she went to church one day, walked in and saw a man sitting in her usual seat.
Okay.
So instead of finding a different place to sit, she sits down in his lap.
Oh. And he said she was a larger woman too, right?
Allegedly.
So, I mean, she probably could have said like, oh, excuse me, that's where I usually sit.
Yeah. But hey.
Yeah, he got the job done. I mean, we're reading about it now.
That's true. It went down in history.
Yeah.
So that is Kate Batts, who So people think that she's a witch, and they just think, okay, well.
They thought she was a witch while she was alive?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So they think that somehow either she's the witch itself, or that she's the
Conjured.
witch. Yes.
Yeah.
She's conjured up this witch at the house to harass.
Dabbling in the occult and black magic.
That's one potential theory that comes up. But you'll learn that there's a lot of unexplained parts of this story. The witch was violent toward John and his daughter Betsy, but was very kind to John's wife Lucy.
Okay.
She was apparently really the only one that she seemed to favor.
Right.
She would, if Lucy was looking for something, she would help find the thing amongst the home, or notify like other people in the home to help bring it to her.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, Lucy gets ill, and the witch reportedly brings her fresh fruit and kind of looks after her. So she's kind and favors her much more than anyone else in the family. Over the years, John Bell started to experience muscle tweaks, like what do you call it?
Like twitches?
Spasms.
Yeah.
Specifically in his face. So they were kind of unusual. That then progressed into tingling sensations, fatigues, seizures. He would also have trouble swallowing because his tongue would swell. And apparently this would happen like off and on. Where he wouldn't be able to really eat for several days because of the tongue issue.
And then tongue one thing.
Yeah. Which that happens to me if I drink too much Diet Coke.
That your tongue gets so swollen you can't eat?
It doesn't get swollen necessarily, but I can get sores on my tongue.
From drinking too much how much Diet Coke does that take?
Sometimes I'll notice if we're away for a weekend and for whatever, I don't drink alcohol. So if I'm at a social thing, I'll usually opt for a Diet Coke. And I realize that they can quickly add up. And
when you down a case of Diet Coke.
Well, maybe not that bad. But I noticed like a few days after, my tongue is sore and I should lay off the acids for a little while.
It's probably something good in Diet Coke that they put in there that does that to your tongue.
In December of 1820, so this is a few years after we first encountered the Bell Witch. I was going to say the Blair Witch. John Bell falls into a coma and he died quietly at home the very next day. So his illness progressed to the point where he passed away.
Yeah, very quickly.
The family then discovered a mysterious vial of dark liquid in the kitchen. It was in a cupboard in the kitchen.
Okay.
That they had never seen before. And one of the sons, John Bell Jr.
Yeah.
I lied. I gave you another name of a kid. You won't have to remember.
Betsy and John Jr.
He finds a stray cat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Skip ahead 10 seconds. He puts just a drop or two of the liquid on the cat's tongue. It apparently sort of jumps up, and as soon as it hits the floor, it's dead.
Wow.
Already? I don't know. That's what the tale says.
Right, because that's not what happened to John Sr. He didn't jump up and then die before he hit the floor.
Well, right. So the thinking is that John was slowly poisoned to death over a very long period of time.
This is some kind of very potent poison.
It's a small cat, so it probably didn't take very much.
Yeah.
He threw the vial into the fire.
Well, that's probably not great. You don't want those fumes.
And it burst into blue flames and went up the chimney. So Betsy, the daughter, whenever she was with her fiance Joshua, the entity would follow her around, kind of continuing to harass her. So she's much younger at the beginning of the story, where she's, innocent in bed and just getting attacked by this witch. But eventually she meets and becomes engaged to Joshua, another boy from the village. And the entity would pull her hair when they were together, would hurl threats at her and curses at both of them. And, Betsy's still reeling from the death of her father and potentially concerned that the witch was the one to kill him, to poison him. She's concerned about Joshua's life and eventually breaks off her engagement to him in order to protect him.
Sad.
Yes. The witch, not long after the engagement was broken off, the witch visited Lucy and told her that she was leaving.
She's better off.
Yeah. She said she was leaving, but that she'd return in 7 years.
Wow. All right.
Sure enough.
7 years to the day.
7 years later, she reappeared to John Bell Jr. and spoke with him about the past, present, and future. She reportedly made predictions about the Civil War, which would still be over years away.
Wow. Okay. What were those predictions?
Just that the war was going to happen. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think that was other people suspected that we were headed towards a civil war at the time too.
Yeah.
It's not like the craziest prediction.
Right. There's another theory about who is behind all this. And one of those theories is Richard Powell. Okay. So Richard Powell was a man who lived in the village who was a teacher. He was specifically Betsy's teacher. He's 11 years older than her, but had a thing for her.
Oh, no, one of those.
He kind of played himself off to be as being like a bachelor, a nice guy. Mm-hmm. He was secretly married to a woman who lived in Nashville.
Okay.
And because people say he was visibly disappointed when Betsy had been engaged.
Right.
Richard also was rumored to have knowledge of the occult, ventriloquism, horticulture, and he was apparently a very good mathematician.
I mean, he sounds like an all-around cool guy.
Yeah.
Knowing about the occult and ventriloquism.
Yeah. So people think he could have pulled off the hoax as like an elaborate way of getting with Betsy because guess who gets married?
The two of them.
Yeah.
Wow. He pulled it off.
It worked. The Bell Witch worked.
The old pretend to be a witch to family of the young girl who you are in love with. And then one day you'll marry her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, kudos to him if that was the plan and he pulled it off.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty impressive.
So there's an arsenic theory. So the symptoms that John Bell had experienced before he passed away, specifically the muscle twitches, the swollen tongue, swallowing thing, long-term exposure to arsenic can cause all of those things. And arsenic turns blue when
thrown into a fireplace.
Yes. So, yeah, it sounds like very likely what that substance could have been arsenic.
Yeah. Now, how would that fit into the theory about this teacher, though, that he wanted the dad out of the way? And
yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't. I think it's such an elaborate hoax. I mean, this went on for years that it doesn't. Like, it kind of makes it seem like if the Richard Powell, the teacher was involved at all, maybe some of the stuff was going on beforehand.
Right. And then he just kind of like fed into it.
He fed into it. And but
that sounds a lot more likely than him being behind all of this
from the very beginning.
And nobody ever noticing this guy creeping around the house.
Yeah.
Doing ventriloquism voices.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of comes to the end of the Bell Witch at the Bell property. There hasn't been a whole lot of other incidents since then. People, occasionally will say that they have encounters, but modern day less so than there had been at that time. It's, you can visit. There's apparently a Bell Witch cave. But
yeah, cave's not really part of the story. Yeah.
And there was most of the story that we know comes from a book that was published in the late 1800s, so quite a bit of time afterward.
Yeah.
But since then, I think the Bell Witch story has also just inspired so much other stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean the story's not that dissimilar from like the story in The Exorcist and a lot of modern, of a kid being harassed by a malevolent spirit in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, a lot of Jeff, the talking
Oh,
mongoose
yeah.
that we had
Yeah,
talked
Jeff the
about
talking
before.
mongoose.
Check out that episode if you haven't heard it. Just with a family being kind of harassed over a very long period of time by something that they can't explain.
Or a ventriloquist.
Yeah, because like that in that story, there was talk of some people one of the kids maybe being able to throw their voice.
Yeah.
So it sounded like
it was coming from somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Like maybe it was a kid, messing with them. But that's the story.
Ventriloquists were suspected of things a lot more back then than they are nowadays.
I think it must have blown people's minds a lot more than it blows our minds in the modern time, because like they're so closely always tied to these stories of paranormal.
Yeah.
A lot more than we ever would think now. Like you think of ventriloquist, you just think, oh, that's a skill that people work to develop. But I think back then people kind of were like mind blown by it. Like that's some crazy power that you have. Yeah.
And especially, 200 years ago, there wasn't the understanding of how sound works like there is today, that you can do these things, like you can make it sound like a sound's coming from somewhere that it's not.
Yeah.
Or it's just, the ventriloquists today are letting us down. They're not as good as they used to be, and they're not out there pranking people and making them think they're being harassed by a spirit like they should.
Or maybe they're just a lot more honest and they don't want to hoax people.
Ventriloquists are not honest people. It's in their very nature not to be. Wow. All right. Well, I'm surprised that like the Bell Witch, I always assumed that it was Bell was like the town or something, not that it was a specific family that was being harassed by this witch.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a cautionary tale. Don't fool around with the occult. You might conjure up a witch who can go to 2 sermons at the same. All right. Well, thank you for the spooky story.
You're welcome.
I'm scared stiff now. And if you have a spooky story you'd like to share with us, why not email us? wannahearpod@gmail.com. You can also send us a voicemail on speakpipe.wannahearpod.com/wannahearpod. And you can check out all of our social media. We're at wannahearpod on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And hey, why not tell a friend about the show and leave us a 5-star review if you like it? That helps shows like us tremendously. I think that's it. You have any parting words, Laura? Just that? Just whoa?
Oh, that was a big ask, and I don't have any concluding thoughts except...
Beware the Bell Witch and stay weird. And we'll see you next week.
Want to Hear Something Weird is a Clamor audio production, distributed by the Cloud 10 Network. Hosted and executive produced by Tom Reynolds and me, Laura Anderson. Executive produced by Aaron Hilliard.
Clamor General Manager Rich Statter. Associate Producer Ethan Aronson. Post-production supervised by Devin Ruskin. Production Assistant Samara Mullick. Special thanks to Sim Sarna and Saiba Krieger at Cloud 10.